Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Santeria, The Religion, by Migene González-Wippler. Foreword by Charles Whetley, M.D. Narrated by Stacy Gonzalez. Publisher's Note: This audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type Santeria into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code MAGIC. Then, click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures and tables referenced in the audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Foreword. As a medical examiner in South Florida, I am frequently brought into close contact with the large Hispanic, mostly Cuban, population, now indigenous to this area. Impressed by the frequent depictions of Catholic saints, in the form of statues, jewelry, candles, and other items, I readily concluded there was a deep devotion to Catholicism among Hispanics. But as time went on, I began to notice things that appeared to be more than just cultural variations of Catholicism. Statues of St. Barbara and an American Indian next to each other. Cigars and pennies for St. Lazarus. Colored beads. Glasses of water in a row, and so forth. Occasionally, I encountered decapitated animals, or a whole room filled with mysterious objects. Drums, stones in bowls, animal skins, objects covered with colored beads, pieces of coconut, etc. My inquiries as to what all this meant were usually met with silence or a pronouncement that this was Cuban voodoo, don't worry about it. One day, I responded to a call to examine some skeletal remains. The object in question was a bloodied skull atop a large iron cauldron filled with dirt and an amazing array of objects: railroad spikes, knives, machetes, animal skulls. The context was obviously religious. Because of threats to destroy the cauldron, I confiscated all the items and had them transported to our office. For the next 10 weeks, the cauldron attracted a steady stream of visitors. Most were curious, and others were obviously fearful. But none were informative. Finally, a few knowledgeable people began grudgingly to relinquish some information. From them, I learned that the cauldron was an nganga of Palo Mayombe. Through it, I was eventually able to discover the phenomenon of Santeria, which, incidentally, has nothing to do with Palo and does not use human remains in its practices. For me, this was an astounding discovery, as Santeria is probably the best-kept secret of Hispanic culture. It is amazing that a religion so widely accepted and practiced is so effectively cloaked in secrecy. When I discovered Santeria, I found there was very little written about this religion in English. Most practitioners were reluctant to divulge any information, especially to a non-Hispanic cultural outsider like myself. By serendipity, I finally met a Cuban-born cultural anthropologist, Rafael Martinez, who helped tremendously with field observations and interviews. I learned other basic concepts from a few dissertations given in Florida universities, and from the earlier writings of Migene González-Wippler. Since then, field observations have continued, and more works on Santeria have appeared in English. Over the past 10 years, it has become evident that many non-Hispanics, like myself, have a genuine desire to learn more about Santeria. For some, the interest is generated through university-based academia and research. Others want a better understanding of the cultural values of Caribbean and South American immigrants. Still others are interested because they suspect the belief system of Santeria may be valuable for personal reasons. Despite this growing interest in Santeria, much remains shrouded in a secrecy that is now unnecessary. Centuries ago, African slaves brought to the New World were forbidden to practice their native religion and were forced to learn Christianity. They resisted, and the result was the creation of Santeria, replete with syncretic depictions of African deities as Catholic saints and a secrecy necessary at the time for survival. Today, however, this secrecy results in distrust and misunderstanding of Santeria by the general public. Most who have only casually heard of Santeria picture voodoo dolls, pierced with needles, the ritualistic sacrifice of defenseless animals, and totally incomprehensible states of possession. And those who make a genuine effort to learn about Santeria are quickly frustrated. Many are thereby deprived of the knowledge of a fascinating religion, with a most interesting history, colorful ceremonies, a rich mythology, and a profound philosophy. Clearly, both factual information and meaningful dialogue are needed if Santeria is to gain acceptance in modern-day America. The issue of animal sacrifice is perhaps the most volatile and emotional issue of the religion. Again, this is partly due to a lack of information, certainly a lack of understanding, and variations among state laws and local ordinances regarding cruelty to animals and religious exemption. For example, in New Jersey, some Santeria practitioners were convicted of animal cruelty, while in Florida, the statutes provided an exemption of animal sacrifice for religious purposes. More recently, a Florida Attorney General opinion stated that animal sacrifice for religious purposes was valid only if the animal is ultimately eaten. Obviously, there is a need for intelligent, non-emotional, and non-confrontational dialogue and compromise to avert religious and legal conflict. Fortunately, the current trend, at least in South Florida, is to promote a better understanding of Santeria. This has taken the forms of seminars at local colleges, as well as specific training sessions. These are often directed at law enforcement officers who frequently come into contact with Santeria. Also, the news media occasionally takes an interest in the religion, with both detrimental as well as beneficial results. In general, news stories often do not provide an accurate or adequate depiction of Santeria, and they usually, often erroneously, attribute the deeds of paleros to Santeria. In-depth investigative reports are often quite good, but like most media events, they tend to focus on what they perceive as sensual. For example, use of skulls by the paleros or animal sacrifice. Within the past several years, two major trends have emerged that promise to bring a better understanding of Santeria to America. One is the advent of American-born Hispanics and non-Hispanics being initiated into Santeria. These individuals seem to be more willing to engage in a meaningful dialogue. They have a good command of the English language and appear to be willing to ignore the traditional code of silence. The second trend has been the appearance, in English, of scholarly works on Afro-American culture in general, and Santeria in particular. These publications have gone far in revealing much of the lore of Santeria and have elucidated its origins, meanings, and widespread appeal. This thesis by Migene González-Wippler will help immeasurably in furthering an understanding of the religion, Santeria. Charles Wetley, M.D., Deputy Chief Medical Examiner, Dade County, Florida. Preface. to the second edition. On June 11, 1993, the Supreme Court reached a unanimous decision in the case of the Church of the Lucumí versus the city of Hialeah in Florida, ruling that a city's prohibition of animal ritual sacrifice violated the constitutional right to free exercise of religion. Justice Anthony M. Kennedy wrote the majority opinion, which was joined in full by Justice John Paul Stevens and, in most respects, by Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist and Justices Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, and Byron R. White. Justice David H. Souter wrote a separate opinion, as did Justice Harry A. Blackmun, whose opinion was joined by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. As part of his summation, Justice Kennedy stated that, given the historical association between animal sacrifices and religious worship, petitioners' assertion that animal sacrifice is an integral part of their religion cannot be deemed bizarre or incredible. Elsewhere in a statement, Justice Kennedy added that, although the practice of animal sacrifice may seem abhorrent to some, religious beliefs need not be acceptable, logical, consistent, or comprehensible to others in order to merit First Amendment protection. When Santeria, the religion, was first published in 1989, the issue of animal sacrifice was the strongest detriment against the practice of Santeria. And even though the Supreme Court has ruled that the Santeros are protected by the First Amendment of the American Constitution, the same prejudices against Santeria and animal sacrifice are still as prevalent as they were before the Supreme Court passed this historical decision. Perhaps the reason why the issue of animal sacrifice in Santeria is so abhorrent to some is that the Santeros conduct the ritual slayings during their ceremonies, cooking and eating the meat of the animals as part of these ceremonies. Contrary to the Jewish kosher slaughtering, which is conducted by rabbis in slaughterhouses where the meat of the animal is cut, packed neatly, wrapped in plastic, and sold in kosher meat markets, the Santeros do not sell the meat of the ritual animals or prepare it for public consumption in a Santeria meat market. If they did, the public outcry might not exist, as everyone is used to seeing packaged meat in the supermarkets, and no one stops to think that these animals are usually slain under the most appalling and cruel conditions. But animals that are slain through religious ritual, as in the koshering and Santeria ceremonies, are sacrificed through prayer and devotion. These ritual slayers are aware of the importance of the sacrifice, and the animal's suffering is consciously minimized. There is no way anyone can defend the issue of animal sacrifice successfully, because the very concept of animal suffering is odious to every compassionate human being. Unfortunately, we live in a society that is largely blind to its own confused double standards of morality. Many of the people who condemn the ritual sacrifices of Santeria have no pangs of conscience when they eat lobster, shrimps, crabs, or crayfish. But these animals are boiled alive so that they may be eaten. And lobsters emit a shrill sound when being thrown into boiling water that is as close to a scream of agony as that of a lamb led to slaughter. What is the rule that makes boiling an animal alive acceptable and humane? Why is it that killing animals in a slaughterhouse is allowable, but killing them in a place of worship is not? What makes human beings so arrogant that they feel they may eat all sorts of animal flesh as well as their blood, spiced and cooked in sausage form, but that these same animals may not be offered to the creative force who brought them into being? Ideally, all living species on this planet should be coexisting with one another peacefully and lovingly. But in order for that to happen, We would have to give up war, hunting, eating animal flesh, destroying the environment and one another. We would have to be tolerant of other people's ideas, opinions, and religious beliefs. We would have to love each other, regardless of race, color, sexual orientation, or country of origin. Unfortunately, it is unlikely that we will achieve this state of utopia anytime in the near future. As long as we do not set our priorities in their proper order and learn the true meaning of love and tolerance, we will be sacrificing something: personal integrity, morals, hope, family values, children, education, social structures, and innocent animals. The second edition of Santeria, the religion, comprises the whole text of the first, with a new chapter added, Chapter 26, Santeria, its dynamics and multiple roots. The additional material is part of a paper I wrote for a symposium I attended at Princeton University in the spring of 1993, sponsored by the Program for the Analysis of Religion Among Latinos, PARAL. In that paper, I supplied very necessary evidence which proves that the Yorubas were brought to Puerto Rico during the slave trade, a fact that some scholars have cast doubts upon. I also discussed other aspects of Santeria, which have been largely ignored until now. I decided to incorporate the new material into this edition because I thought it would be of interest to people doing serious research on the subject of Santeria, particularly in the fields of anthropology, sociology, theology, and the humanities in general. The book is more thorough now, but it is by no means an exhaustive work. Santeria is too complex a subject to be fully analyzed in one single volume. It is to be hoped that as Santeria is better understood, more research will be conducted that will reveal new truths about this mysterious religion. Preface. When I wrote my first book on Santeria, African Magic in Latin America, I had a great deal of difficulty researching the subject. Most of the santeros, priests of the religion, who were notoriously secretive, were very reluctant to discuss their beliefs and practices with me. Those who were willing to talk did so in a veiled way, and very often misled me or gave me wrong information about their religious practices. This was done purposely in order to preserve the traditional mystery that has always pervaded the practices of Santeria. As a result, several of the beliefs and rites that I described in that first book were incomplete and, in some instances, incorrect. From a sociological and anthropological point of view, these errors are significant because they underline the zealousness with which the santeros protect the mysteries of their religion. By the time I wrote my second book, The Santeria Experience, I had received several of the initiations of Santeria, and the santeros had learned that my respect for their religion was genuine, and that my desire to introduce it to an English-reading audience was rooted in my firm conviction that Santeria was as viable and dynamic as any of the world's major religions. They were far more cooperative and truthful the second time around, and although a few still resented my persistent prodding, they seemed to realize the importance of revealing at least some of the practices that have made Santeria so well known. They did not open the door completely, but rather left it ajar so that some of the wonders within might be glimpsed by observers standing outside. The second book contained very few errors, and those that crept in were largely the result of second-hand information. Several other books followed the first two, and academic and public interest grew with each one. When Harmony approached me about the possibility of reprinting Santeria and the Santeria Experience, it seemed clear that what was really needed was a comprehensive volume that encompassed the most vital portions of the first 2 books and presented additional material that heretofore had not been published. That is how this new book came into being. In the interest of conciseness and accuracy, some of the old material has been excised, and many necessary corrections have been incorporated into the original texts. The new material and the extraordinary photographs, many of them previously unpublished, help make the book far more thorough and informative than the first 2. Ashe Dowu Oludumare. Introduction. Santeria was born in Nigeria, along the banks of the Niger River. This is the country of origin of the Yoruba people, many of whom, along with the members of other African tribes, were brought to the New World by slave traders over 4 centuries ago. The Yoruba brought with them the colorful mythology of their religion, known in Cuba as Lukumi and in Brazil as Macumba and Candomblé. The Yoruba people originated in southwestern Nigeria. At one time, they had a powerful and complex social structure organized in a series of kingdoms, the most important of which was Benin. The Kingdom of Benin lasted from the 12th century until 1896, when it was dispersed by English colonists. Benin was a form of theocratic autocracy where the Oba, or king, had absolute power. The advanced culture of the Benin civilization can be appreciated in the beautiful works of bronze and ivory, dating from archaic times to the 17th century, that can be found in many museums throughout the world. At the beginning of the 17th century, the Ewe people invaded the region of Dahomey and the neighboring kingdoms, forcing the Yoruba tribes to migrate to the Nigerian coast, where many of them were captured by slave traders and brought to the New World. The most interesting and important aspects of the Yoruba culture are its mythology and religious practices. Extensive studies of the Yoruba cult, notably those by William Bascom and Roger Bastide, have shown that the Yoruba pantheon is extremely complex and sophisticated, and strongly reminiscent of the ancient Greeks. Their deities, known as orishas, are believable and extraordinarily human in their behavior. The term orisha is of uncertain origin. Some anthropologists believe it is derived from the word asha, meaning religious ceremony. Others claim it is formed of the roots ri, to see, and sha, to choose. There are many orishas in the pantheon. Some authorities believe that in Africa their number exceeds 600. In Latin America, their number fluctuates between 20 and 25. As members of the various African tribes were scattered throughout the New World by the slave trade, their religious practices were influenced by their new surroundings and the strange languages spoken in the lands of their exile. Each tribe borrowed freely from the customs, ideas, and religious beliefs of its adopted land. This brought great diversity into the magic ceremonies of Black people. The rites varied with each tribe. In Haiti, voodoo, or voodoon, was propagated by the Fon, the Nago, and the Congo, the Ibo, the Dahomians, and other tribes. In the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, similar magic rites were transmitted by the Yoruba, Bantu, and Congo people. There are some similarities between Santeria and voodoo, notably the worship of some of the same deities, such as Jango, Ogun, known as Ogu in voodoo, and Elegua, called Legba in voodoo. The similarities are the result of the fusion of beliefs when different tribes intermixed. But in general, the divergences between the two religions are far greater than the similarities, largely because in Santeria, the Yoruba influence supersedes that of any other culture. Also, Haiti was under French rule during the slave trade, while other Caribbean countries, such as Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Dominican Republic, were dominated by Spain. In Cuba, where Santeria originated, the Yoruba became known as lukumi, a word that means friendship. Some research believe that this term is derived from akumi, which means I am aku. In Sierra Leone, where the Yoruba are also found, they are known as aku. This may indicate that many of the Yoruba who were brought to Cuba came from Sierra Leone. The Cuban lukumis were deeply influenced by the Catholic iconolatry of their Spanish masters. In their efforts to hide their magical and religious practices from the eyes of the Spaniards, they identified their deities with the saints of the Catholic Church. This was the beginning of Santeria, which is a term derived from the Spanish word santo, saint, and literally means the worship of saints. Santeria is a typical case of syncretism, the spontaneous, popular combination or reconciliation of different religious beliefs. This syncretism can be appreciated in the fact that all of the Yoruba deities worshipped in Santeria have been identified with Catholic saints. Santeria is therefore a mixture of the magic rites of the Yoruba and some of the traditions of the Catholic Church. All the legends that surround the lives of Jesus, Mary, and the Catholic saints are of great importance to the Santero because they help delineate the personalities of the saints, making it easier to identify them with the appropriate Yoruba deities. But in spite of the influence of the Catholic Church, Santeria is mostly primitive magic, and its roots are deeply buried in the heart of Africa. Although the Yoruba were successful in hiding their orishas under the guise of Catholic saints, it did not take long for the Spanish settlers to realize what the slaves were doing. The Yoruba religion comprises an intricate system of rituals and ceremonies of a distinct magical nature, all of which the slaves conducted in the woods. This resulted in a great deal of persecution, which forced the slaves to cloak their religion in secrecy. All the rituals, especially the initiations, were conducted under stringent vows of secrecy. This secrecy, which never existed in Nigeria, is still observed by the practitioners of Santeria today, and is one of the reasons the religion is so closed to outsiders. The vows of secrecy, which once meant the difference between life and death to the Yoruba, became an intrinsic part of the Santeria tradition, and the Santeros are adamant about observing it, even though it is no longer necessary. Santeria is an earth religion, a magical religious system that has its roots in nature and natural forces. Each orisha, or saint, is identified with a force of nature and with a human interest or endeavor. Jango, for instance, is the orisha who controls fire, thunder, and lightning. But he also symbolizes raw power and control over enemies and general difficulties. Because of his tremendous dynamism, he is also seen as the embodiment of passion and virility, and is often invoked in works of seduction. Oshun, on the other hand, symbolizes river waters, but is also the patron of love and marriage, fertility, and gold. She is essentially the archetype of joy and pleasure. Yemaya is identified with the sea, but is also the symbol of motherhood and protects women in their endeavors. Elegua is the orisha of the crossroads and controls change and destiny. He is the one who makes things possible or impossible and symbolizes the balance of things. Obatala is the father, the symbol of peace and purity, and is the creator of mankind on a physical level. Everything white belongs to him. Oya symbolizes the winds and is the owner of the cemetery, the watcher of the doorway between life and death. She is not death, but the awareness of its existence. She is also the owner of the Thunderbolt, and many santeros believe
Sample complete. Ready to continue?